Whilst Brazil had experienced a period of dramatic growth in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this had mostly been built off of a boom in demand for various raw materials like rubber, coffee, and the like. When these markets collapsed, and later began to be partially eroded by artificial replacements, the cash flow cut off, and the Brazilian Navy found itself going through a prolonged lean period, starting at the beginning of the 1910s. Thus, for many years, the Navy's only destroyers consisted of a small flotilla of 1900s-era ships of less than 600 tons, and a single ex-Royal Navy Acasta-class ship that came in at just under 1,000 tons. But by the late 1930s, the demand and the funds were available to try and replace what were by then hopelessly obsolete ships, and two classes were planned. One bought from the UK, the Juruá class, and the other built in Brazil, the first ocean-going warships to be built in that country, of the modern type. These would be the Marcilio Dias class. For inspiration, they looked to the USA, basing their plans off the Mahan class, which at the time was in the process of finalising construction. Due to the relative inexperience of the Brazilian yards, though, the final result varied somewhat from the Mahans. At 1,424 tons standard displacement, the Brazilian vessels were only 24 tons heavier, notionally, than their US predecessors, but there were various minor changes that reflected the circumstances of their construction. Power output at 42,800 shaft horsepower was 3,200 less than a Mahan, dropping the top speed by half a knot to 36.5 knots. Range dropped almost 500 miles to 6,500 nautical miles, and the weapons loadout was also different. As planned, both classes would carry 5 single 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns, but the Brazilian ships would only have 2 quad-torpedo launchers instead of 3, plus 4 each of the 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons instead of the scattering of 50 cals on the Mahans, although this latter reflected more the later build time of the ships than anything else. Additionally, the 5-inch guns on the US ships were all enclosed in light gun houses, whereas on the Brazilian ships they were open-mounted, except for the foremost gun, which was given a basic shield. Again, due to this all being new to them, the 3 ships, Marcilio Dias, Maris y Barros, and Greenhala, were laid down in 1937, but not launched until 1940, and 1941 in the latter ship's case, and not commissioned until the end of 1943. A total of just over 6 years compared to the 2.5-year average keel to commission time of the Mahans. During this time, changes were made. 4 depth charge throwers and a sonar were installed, in addition to the existing depth charge rails, and the amidship 5-inch and one of the torpedo launchers was removed in favour of 4 additional 20mm Oerlikons. This reflected the reality that, whilst the ships were fitting out, Brazil had declared war on Germany as a result of the U-boat campaign, and so the ships were commissioned straight into action, initially joining convoy escorts until summer 1944, when the Brazilian Expeditionary Force was launched. This was made up of a full division, plus a fighter squadron and various support units for both, and these all needed to be shipped to the battlefields of Europe, and the 3 destroyers would be assigned as part of the escort, which would see them safely conveyed to Italy. All 3 ships would survive the war, being joined by a mixture of further Brazilian-built ships and US-built destroyer escorts, and would be modernised to serve through the late 1940s, 1950s, and into the 1960s. However, by that point they were clearly in need of replacement, and the Marcilio Dias and Greenhala were decommissioned in 1966. Maris y Barros was retained for experiments with the Sea-Cat missile system, and then she was decommissioned in 1972 once the tests had been completed and the missile system itself relocated to another ship. The ship names, however, survived, Marcilio Dias and Maris y Barros being granted to a pair of ex-US Navy Gearing-class destroyers that had been bought a few years later, and the name Greenhala would turn up somewhat later when the Brazilian Navy acquired the ex-HMS Broadsword. But all of these ships are themselves now taken out of service, with the next reoccurrence of the name likely to be the 4th Tamandaré-class frigate due later this decade, which will bring the name Maris y Barros back into active duty.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.